Nicole Kidman has made her first public appearance since her split from Keith Urban.
Been through a lot together.
We've got a timeline for it now, and the time it's now.
For nearly 20 years, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban told the world a story about redemption. Two Australians, both wounded, both brilliant, both searching for something they couldn't quite name, found each other in 2005 and decided to heal together. What followed was what every celebrity magazine called a fairy tale. A Grammy-winning musician, an Oscar-winning actress, a love story that seemed to defy the odds of Hollywood. They had the lavish wedding, the stunning homes, the two beautiful daughters. Every red carpet, every interview, every public appearance reinforced the same narrative: we saved each other. But in September 2025, Nicole Kidman filed for divorce after 19 years of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. What was once positioned as a masterpiece of love and recovery suddenly revealed itself as something far more complicated and far more human. And the truth of what happened behind those carefully curated images tells us something important about the difference between the stories we tell and the lives we actually live. Nicole Kidman grew up as one of Hollywood's most talented actresses, but talent came with a price. She was painfully shy as a child, so shy that performing became her only language. If real life was terrifying, the stage was safety. But that refuge came at a cost she would spend the rest of her life processing. The most defining moment of her early life was losing custody of her two children with Tom Cruise in 2001. That failure, and it's important to call it what it felt like to her, haunted her. Kidman became someone who needed control. She needed stability. She needed to build a life where she would never lose something so precious again. Keith Urban came from a completely different place. He was a musical prodigy from New Zealand, but prodigies often arrive in the world already broken. His genius came with addiction, to alcohol, to cocaine, to the chaos that fueled his creativity. Keith wasn't looking for stability. He was looking for someone who could love him while he was still in pieces. He was looking for someone to save him. When they met at a Day USA gala in January 2005, they recognized something in each other immediately. Here was a woman who needed to fix something broken. Here was a man who desperately needed fixing. It felt like fate. It felt like the universe had finally balanced itself perfectly. They married on June 25, 2006, in a lavish Sydney ceremony with the Australian Sun as their witness. The message was clear: this is a love story that matters. This is two wounded people becoming whole together. But fairy tales don't survive contact with reality. Just 4 months after their wedding, in October 2006, Keith Urban checked himself into a rehabilitation facility to address his substance abuse. The news shattered the narrative before it had barely been written. This is where Nicole's character was truly tested. A less committed person would have left. By every reasonable measure, Nicole had just married someone still actively battling demons. But she stayed. She attended his graduation from rehab. She posed for photographs. She told the world that she had never been prouder of him, that their marriage was stronger than ever. What nobody said publicly was how this moment revealed the fundamental architecture of their relationship: Nicole as the strong one, Keith as the recovering one, Nicole as the caretaker, Keith as the person being cared for. And on the surface, it worked. 4 years it worked. Keith released album after album, each one acclaimed, each one positioned as a triumph over his demons. He performed at the Grammys. He earned the respect of the music industry. He became, by every public measure, a recovery success story. But recovery is not the same as healing. And for 19 years, they tried to convince themselves, and the world, that they were the same thing. Between 2006 and 2020, the story they told the world became increasingly disconnected from the story they were actually living. They had 2 daughters together: Sunday Rose, born in 2008, and Faith Margaret, born in 2010. Motherhood gave Nicole something she had been searching for since losing custody in 2001, a second chance. A do-over. A way to prove that she could be the mother she always knew she could be. But motherhood also revealed the cracks. Keith's career required constant touring. Nicole's career required long filming shoots. They spent more time apart than together, communicating from different time zones, parenting with different philosophies. Here's what matters: separation itself is not a relationship killer. Thousands of couples navigate it. But when separation combines with unresolved trauma, Nicole's need for control meeting Keith's need for freedom, her desire for stability meeting his restlessness. The relationship begins to fracture from the inside. The public didn't see this. What the public saw was photographs of them holding hands at award shows. They saw interviews where Nicole would describe Keith as her greatest love. They saw a couple that seemed enviable, stable, lasting. What they didn't see was the growing emotional distance. What they didn't see was how two people can spend 19 years with someone and still end up completely alone. But stay with us, because what happened in 2025 didn't appear out of nowhere. The full story runs far deeper than a simple celebrity divorce. Let's find out what really happened. At the very center of Nicole and Keith's marriage sat an irreconcilable conflict. Nicole needed a partner who would stay put. Someone who could be present, available, controlled. Someone who would build a life based on boundaries and predictability. This wasn't neurotic, it was rational. She had lost her children once. She needed to build a life where that could never happen again. Keith needed movement. He needed restlessness. He needed the chaos and freedom that fueled his artistry and helped him manage his demons. A structured, controlled life felt like suffocation to him. The road was where he healed. Performance was where he found peace. These two needs don't exist on a spectrum where compromise is possible. They are opposites. And for 19 years, they tried to meet in the middle. Nicole would travel with him sometimes. Keith would stay home sometimes. But the compromise was never satisfying to either of them. It was just exhausting. The addiction he carried, the same addiction that had nearly destroyed him in 2006, was never truly resolved. It was managed. And management isn't the same as healing. And healing is what he actually needed if he was going to be the partner Nicole deserved. By the early 2020s, something fundamental had shifted in their marriage. The love was still there, genuine love, but love alone is not enough to hold two people together when their fundamental needs are incompatible. But this is where the story gets truly disturbing, because what happened next reveals something painful about the price of maintaining an image. The pandemic forced a reckoning that no amount of touring or interviews could delay. When the world locked down in 2020, Keith couldn't tour. Nicole couldn't film. They were forced into the one thing their relationship had never been able to sustain: prolonged, uninterrupted presence with each other. They had two teenage daughters who needed more than ever before. They had a marriage that hadn't actually been examined in years because the constant motion had obscured how hollow it had become. And they had to look at each other, really look at each other, for the first time in nearly 15 years. During these years, they made a series of public statements that, in hindsight, appear to have been defensive rather than honest. They gave interviews to major magazines positioning their marriage as stronger than ever. They attended events together, smiled for photographs, reinforced the narrative that had sustained them for so long. But here's what is critical to understand. They were performing for each other at this point, not for the public. The public performance had simply become so habitual that they couldn't distinguish between the real story and the story they told. They had been acting out the role of the couple that survived for so long that they had forgotten how to be anything else. And that performance was suffocating them both. The deterioration of Nicole and Keith's marriage wasn't random. It followed a pattern that explains not just their specific story, but illuminates something important about love, addiction, recovery, and the pressure of public scrutiny. When Keith entered rehab in 2006, he did what the system asked him to do. He addressed his substance abuse. He did the work. He emerged sober and recommitted to his career and his marriage. By every metric, it was a success. But recovery and healing are not the same thing. Recovery is the absence of the behavior. Healing is the transformation of the underlying wound that caused the behavior in the first place. Keith recovered. But the pain that addiction had been masking? That never got addressed. And a marriage cannot survive when one partner is still carrying unprocessed trauma while the other partner is desperately trying to create a stable container for it. Nicole's need for control, born from the trauma of losing her children, became the invisible architecture of their entire marriage. She didn't need Keith to be happy. She needed him to be predictable. She needed him to be safe. She needed him to never threaten the stability she had rebuilt. But you cannot love someone into a box. And Keith, by his very nature, is someone who needs space. The more Nicole tightened the control, the more Keith needed to escape it. And the more he escaped, the more Nicole needed to tighten the control. It became a loop with no exit. This wasn't abuse. It wasn't malicious. It was two people with incompatible needs, trying desperately to make incompatible things work through sheer force of will. The most corrosive element of their marriage was not the addiction. It was not the distance. It was the constant, exhausting performance. They maintained their public image as a unified, functioning, thriving couple at the exact moment when they should have been having honest conversations about whether staying together was actually serving either of them. But having that conversation would have required stepping out of character. It would have required admitting that the narrative they had built was cracking. So instead, they doubled down. They gave interviews celebrating their marriage. They appeared on red carpets looking happy. They reinforced the story while the actual relationship deteriorated in private. The performance became the prison. And eventually, the prison becomes inescapable. Hold on to that detail, because what comes next changed absolutely everything about how we understand what this marriage actually was. And it's still ahead. On September 8, 2025, Nicole Kidman filed for divorce from Keith Urban after 19 years of marriage. The official reason was irreconcilable differences, the most honest and least informative phrase in family law. What matters is what happened immediately after. Keith's response was not the dignified silence of a man who had expected this. His response was the raw, visceral reaction of someone who had been blindsided. He performed concerts without his wedding ring, a physical symbol that was impossible to miss. He changed the lyrics to songs he had written during their marriage. He performed with visible anger and heartbreak. In one performance just weeks after the filing, he dedicated a song to a woman who had everything a man could give her, a statement that was part apology, part accusation, part desperate attempt to rewrite the narrative one final time. And in that moment, something important was revealed. Keith was grieving. But what was he grieving? Was he grieving the actual marriage? Or was he grieving the loss of the story he had spent 19 years telling himself and the world? Nicole, by contrast, retreated. She was spotted traveling with her daughters, rebuilding the life of stability she had always wanted. She was not giving raw performances. She was not changing lyrics. She was not performing her pain publicly. The contrast is instructive. Keith needed an audience for his grief. Nicole needed silence and privacy. This difference, this fundamental incompatibility in how they process pain, manage emotion, and exist in the world, had always been there. But it took divorce for it to become visible. The real revelation of their divorce was not personal to them. It was universal. What Nicole and Keith's marriage reveals is something essential about love, about recovery, about the fundamental question of whether two broken people can actually heal each other. The answer, their answer, is not when they are breaking in opposite directions. Nicole broke toward control, structure, and the illusion of safety. Keith broke toward freedom, movement, and the chaos that had always felt like home to him. They tried, genuinely tried, to meet in the middle for 19 years. But the middle ground between control and freedom doesn't actually exist. It's just a place where both people feel equally suffocated. The most devastating element of their story is not the addiction. It's not the distance. It's not even the incompatibility. It's the performance. For 19 years, they performed this marriage. They performed it so perfectly, so consistently, so convincingly, that they convinced not just the world but themselves. They built an image of redemption and enduring love so carefully that when the actual marriage collapsed, it felt like a sudden tragedy rather than a slow deterioration everyone could have seen coming if they had stopped performing long enough to look. Here is what Keith didn't say when he was changing lyrics and performing without his ring. I didn't know how to be honest with you for 19 years, and by the time I realized it, it was too late. Here is what Nicole didn't say when she filed for divorce. I built a prison out of my need for control, and you were suffocating inside it, and I couldn't stop building because I was too afraid of losing you the way I lost my children. They never said these things because they had spent 19 years not saying things. They had spent 19 years performing instead of connecting. They had spent 19 years telling a story instead of living an honest life. What makes Nicole and Keith's divorce significant is not how unique it is. It's how universal it is. Their marriage followed a pattern that plays out countless times across the world every single day. Two people who are attracted to each other's wounds instead of each other's wholeness, creating a relationship that is actually a mutual rescue mission that neither person is equipped to accomplish. Nicole was attracted to Keith's talent and his brokenness because his brokenness made her feel necessary. Keith was attracted to Nicole's strength and her control because he desperately needed someone else to manage his chaos. But here's what this pattern reveals. Attraction is not the same as compatibility. Needing someone is not the same as loving them. And saving someone is not the same as building a life with them. These are three completely different things. Nicole and Keith had all the attraction and the neediness and the rescue fantasy. What they didn't have was actual compatibility. What they didn't have was the ability to love each other at their best instead of at each other's worst. Here is what many people felt watching this marriage fall apart. Confusion mixed with a strange sense of betrayal. If you were someone who believed in their love story, and millions of people did, the divorce felt like a personal betrayal. You had invested emotionally in their narrative of redemption. You had celebrated their survival. You had used their marriage as proof that love could conquer everything. And then it didn't. This is why it matters to acknowledge what actually happened. They performed a marriage so well that they made millions of people believe in something that wasn't actually there. This is not their fault. This is not about blame. It's about the price of packaging your life as a product, which is what public figures do. But the cost of that packaging is enormous. The cost is that the real marriage, the complicated, messy, incompatible actual marriage, never got to exist. It never got to breathe. It got suffocated under the weight of the performance. So if you're feeling grief about their divorce, understand this. You're allowed to feel sad that the story ended. You're allowed to feel disappointed that the fairy tale wasn't real. But you're also allowed to recognize that the fairy tale was never possible. Not between these two people. Not with these two stories. The deepest level, Nicole and Keith's marriage teaches us something crucial about love that the culture rarely admits. Love is not always enough. We tell ourselves that love conquers all. That if two people love each other, they can overcome anything. But that's a comforting lie. The truth is more complicated. Love can exist between two people who are fundamentally incompatible. Love can exist in a marriage that is slowly suffocating both partners. Love can exist alongside dishonesty, distance, and a desperate need to maintain an image. Love, by itself, is not enough. What you also need is compatibility. You need honesty. You need the ability to meet each other's actual needs instead of your fantasy of each other's needs. Nicole needed someone who could tolerate her need for control and stability. Keith needed someone who could celebrate his restlessness and his need for freedom. They loved each other deeply, but they were not the person the other one actually needed. And sometimes, the most honest act a couple can do is to admit that truth and step back. Nicole has retreated with her daughters to rebuild the stable life she has always wanted. She will continue acting. She will continue being excellent at what she does. She will rebuild the sense of control and safety that comes from being present, available, and solid. Keith will continue performing. He will continue making music. He will continue processing his emotions publicly because that is how he heals. The anger in those early post-divorce performances will eventually become vulnerability. The vulnerability will become art. The art will become something that helps millions of people feel less alone. They will probably never be friends. They will probably spend the rest of their lives telling different versions of this story. Nicole's version will probably emphasize the importance of compatibility and honesty. Keith's version will probably emphasize how hard he tried to be what she needed. And both versions will be true. And both will be incomplete. What matters now is not what happened between them. What matters is what we learn from looking at what happened between them. So here is what I genuinely want to hear from you. Do you believe two people who are fundamentally incompatible can actually make a marriage work if they love each other enough? Or do you think that compatibility is more important than love? Because Nicole and Keith's story doesn't give us an easy answer. It shows us that love is real, that their marriage was real, and that it still wasn't enough. And that raises a question worth asking about our own relationships, about the stories we tell, and about the difference between the person we love and the person we actually need. Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation truly belongs to all of us. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the headlines.